Welcome to the Voice of TIE podcast, a space for stories, insights, and conversations that uplift the profession of teaching and inspire positive change in international schools. For over 40 years, the international educator has served this community through recruitment resources and a dedication to amplifying the voices of international educators around the world. Hi, I want to welcome Jeff Paulson, the director. Is it director? Is that your title?
Actually co-director now with
Co-director.
Mm-hmm.
All right, great. Co-director of the Academy for International School Heads, which how is it that you pronounce that acronym?
AISH.
AISH.
AISH. Yep, AISH.
And how long have you been in that role now, Jeff?
I've been privileged to be the co-director of AISH now for 2 years. I'm going on
Okay.
my third year.
And what were you doing before that? What was sort of your pathway and trajectory into this role?
Prior to that, I was, well, served a lot of different roles in education, but for the past 20, 25 years, serving as a high school principal, deputy head, and then a head of school.
And where was the last school that you were at?
Well, the last school internationally where I was Zurich International School, and that was for 7 years. And then my last headship actually was in the United States at a domestic private international school in Boise, Idaho, called Riverstone International School.
So you've gone back and forth between being in the States, working domestically and international.
Yeah, I've actually, yeah, exactly. I have gone back and forth at very strategic times in our lives, whether it was when I was finishing my doctorate or when we had young children. But I have worked in public, private, international, domestic, boarding, um, independent private schools, international schools abroad. So I feel like I've worked in almost every kind of school. I've even worked in a national system school in Peru. So
Okay.
again, it's one of those things where I think leadership can be applicable in all different kinds of
Different.
domains.
I think sometimes we do tend to think about like them being like almost different silos, but it is all education, across the board, and we're all serving kids.
It is, and my dissertation was actually around leadership competencies and in what was needed more or less of in those different domains, in the sense of different contextual domains, I should say, in the sense of location, geographic, or the type of schools. And my dissertation study actually showed that the competencies are equally important in all of them.
In all contexts.
Right, right.
So, my big burning question, as somebody who has also been in international schools and schools a long time and has never had the desire, despite being a leader for over 15 years in international schools, like head of school is not on my checklist. Like, not going to do it, never going to apply. Why do people want this role? What's the motivation? When so
Oh,
many of us are like, no, 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 that looks like way too much.
that is a really good question. I got to be honest, being a head of school is probably the greatest job in the world. I have never felt more satisfaction, more
Mm.
fulfillment, never more of a sense of impact and giving and serving others. I think what's always driven me as a somebody who aspired to be in a leadership role was understanding the responsibility that came with that around providing an experience for people in the sense of what they needed to be successful and to contribute to a dynamic environment that in schools is all around teaching and learning. So to me, it was is really was taking the time to personalize the approach, get to know people, seek connections, and really try to individualize both for kids and for adults what they needed to actually maximize their experience. One of my aspirations always as I head of school was I wanted people in our time together to be able to look back at our experience as a baseline experience for life.
Mm.
That they would say, oh, I worked with Jeff and we worked together, we worked at this school and here's what we accomplished and it was great. That kind of thing. So to me, this spirit of teamwork and collaboration, it was so much more than just you being the head of school. It was about inspiring others to really contribute in this. I kind of look at a big circle of teaming, and maybe a very complex network of teaming, really to do amazing things for kids and for people.
That's so interesting because I think I must have like more of a half glass empty approach to when I look at the role, because for me, that would be my logical professional next step would be moving in that direction, which I'm not going to take. But I think I always look at the role. And I think having been a director of learning and essentially kind of serving in a deputy head of school role, at times I just look at all the responsibility of the role. So I can imagine the excitement and the idea of impact, but that's that glass half empty piece as I see the responsibility as more of the glass and the pressure of that responsibility for all those teachers and all those students.
Mm.
How did you manage that sense of responsibility in the context of also really enjoying the role and the opportunities and the potential impacts? Because there's just so much that comes with the role that's heavy.
Yeah, that's a very true statement, and that sense of responsibility, I think, is one that really people need to reflect on and really think about how they're going to make that work authentically
Hmm.
in their leadership. I just always viewed responsibility as this day by day progression of work and conversation. And some days you may move two or three steps forward, and the next day you may move a couple steps back. But at the end of the week, if you metaphorically, if you were just a few steps ahead of where you were before,
Hmm.
in the sense of bringing people along, um, then that was a good week. So to me, being a head of school and being in these roles is something that I would be exhausted at night thinking, "Oh my goodness." But the next morning I'd wake up fired up and let's get going. Let's do it again.
Yeah.
Because there's always this sense of renewal and hope and vision around and opportunity, to be honest, to have 1,001 more conversations that day with all different kinds of people, but basically asking and talking about the same thing. And again, it was really building that culture, reinforcing those values, trying to find ways to seek engagement, active voice. I wanted everybody to be a contributing member, right? And so again, that responsibility piece is just so important because when you move into that head of school role, there are three areas that really individuals need to make sure they are always really mindful of is that with that role change, so the first R, there's a role change.
Yeah.
You're no longer doing what you were doing before, which means then some of the responsibilities change. And those responsibilities are deeply connected to what people expect from you and how they're going to be holding you accountable for what they might need to be successful in their work, right? So you got the role, you got the responsibility, and frankly, at the end of the day, then too, you also have you can't you relationships have to change, and that's always been the hardest one, right? Because
Right.
you want those deep connections with people to be meaningful, but I guess I've only, I guess I've honestly always felt that the greatest way you can treat people with integrity, honesty, and respect is to be honest and straightforward about that relationship and how that looks and feels because of your role.
Right.
And so role, responsibility, and relationships have to change, but in ways that are authentically real to you and in ways that you can communicate to your.
So you have like a really strong like mental model for what this role looks like and the impact that it can have. But one of the things that you told me that I've always found really, I mean, I guess surprising is that the average length of service of a head of school is under 3 years. So what does that say about the role? Why do you believe it's under 3 years? Because obviously, the less time you're in a place, the less impact you can have for good or bad, right? Like you can have really bad impact in a short period of time, as well. But why do you believe that the role is that people serve in a role in a school for less than 3 years?
Hmm. You ask that question, I kind of look up and I just have to think a little bit because there are so many factors that can get in the way of that tenure. I think from the head of school's perspective, the fit is just so important that when you are sitting in that chair and you find yourself in charge of an organization and sitting and being responsible for the work that needs to be done, you have to fall in love with it. It has to become your place and it has to be something that you're deeply, deeply invested in. And if that emotional connection doesn't doesn't happen, then that's an issue, right? For
Right.
the heads. And I can't tell you how many heads I've met who've spent a week or two in their new job and sat back in their chair and thought, what am I doing?
Right.
How did I get here? The other complexities are, I think, are around relationships. You know, the role is just mirrored in conflict and tension and perception around what you're or how you're spending your time. And if conflict does enter into it, which it typically does when you're holding people accountable or you have expectations around performance and and how people go about actualizing their work, it's only compounded when you are talking with and working with people who aren't educators. So think about
Meaning,
it, right.
meaning the board.
Well, not just the board, but parents,
Okay.
external partners, community members,
Okay.
people who are very generous with the school, alumni, for example.
Hmm.
But you know, in some ways, I think the best way I can describe the complexity of serving in a school as a leader is you are dealing potentially with every developmental age from age 3 through people being elderly. So you're dealing with almost every developmental age and life
Oh,
circumstance and real life contextual complication that could exist around what people could bring into the school environment, especially if the school is a support organization for a community, which typically they are in international schools.
yeah.
And you compound that with the emotion that parents have for their children, because one thing I've found with parents everywhere is they love their kids and and they're deeply passionate and want the best for them. So when you compound some of the developmental complexities with emotion, sometimes rationality and sometimes that kind of way of approaching problems isn't always the best answer. So I think the tenure for the international school head is tenuous at 2.8, which is the average, unfortunately, in today's world. But there's no reason why in the next 5 years we can't seek aspirationally to double it to 5.6. Relationship
And what
hard.
what needs to happen for that to increase that longevity, do you think? Like what are some key steps that like AISH and other organizations are taking to try and extend that tenure? Because I know as a school we really watch tenure of teachers, and we set goals around tenure of teachers. Like how is it organizationally that you're trying to help set goals for longer tenure?
Great question. You know, I believe with AISH in our professional standards and leadership standards of excellence, the more leaders we can the more leaders that are actually using those standards as a way to professionalize and frame their practice, set their evaluation and annual feedback loop with a board, communicating with their community around the work that they do, and here's what a highly effective head of school does do
Right.
kinds of things, the better, and setting those expectations and setting those parameters in some ways. The other thing I think in some ways is maybe more psychological. It's dealing with the complexities of relationship. So
Yeah.
how do you prepare a community and proactively communicate and talk about times when we're going to disagree, when we're going to have differences of opinion? Because in some ways, without practice and without actually talking through some of those experiences, it leads to hard feelings and it leads to people becoming defensive or switching off. And the last thing that can happen in a community is when a group of people have given up on another group of people around listening or seeking to understand. So again, it's hard for the head of school because in some schools, the head of school can't appear to be vulnerable, has to appear to always have the answers, has to appear to always be proactive in their work. And in the reality, the head of school is always going to be vulnerable. And the
Hmm.
head of school is never going to always know what they need to do. How's that? Never always, right? That's
Right.
making one sense. But they're never always going to know. And there's always going to be tension in relationships around disagreements. So again, in some ways, I think the more we can proactively talk about those and engage with heads of schools proactively around some of the conversations behind the scenes for them to I don't know, be on top of it more and to feel more comfortable
Hmm.
in their communities. That's a going to be a win-win. I do believe also the fit is just so important, and so I really admire some of the tools that I know are being researched around talking about skills, strengths, and professional experiences that people have had and really really using those as springboards for conversations around what schools and leaders need.
It's one of the reasons that we started the Thai podcast was to sort of talk about some of the series that we do. And you've actually already hit on a series that we've been putting out this year with Jennifer Abrams about sort of leading in polarizing times. Like you've been kind of speaking to that about just sort of the tensions, the natural tensions, I think, that exist in schools that I think with the polarization that we've been experiencing have been amplified. So one of the things that we've been doing with your organization is last year we ran a series written by heads of schools, about the role, because I think both of us agree and our organizations agree that sometimes people don't maybe understand from the outside the complexity of the role. So we're going to do a second year of this series. Can you tell us a little bit about sort of some of the goals that you want people to understand about the role if I'm a teacher or a counselor or a parent or anybody who reads Thai?
It's a great series that Ty is doing, that Ty headship series. And I think the spirit of it really authentically was to help school communities better understand the role of the head of school. And and you started the whole conversation by why would you want to become a head of
Yeah,
school, right? And that's a great question to talk about the motivations and the reasons why that's important for somebody to actually sit in that chair and to be the role. Quite often, it's not because of ego, it's not because of money, it's not because of reputation. It's actually around words like impact, fulfillment, service, and trying to maximize experience for people. It's just that that often doesn't get communicated. And in
yeah,
the absence of that being communicated and celebrated and talked about in partnership with that being maybe very similar to the motivations of all educators, in the absence of that, then it's the gap is filled with people just not knowing who that person is who sits in that chair. And it's more of a mystery and it's more of a, wonder what this person is like. Because they may not seem human. They may not
right.
seem like us, right? And so the more you can personalize that and get up in front and let people know that you are human, that you do make mistakes, that you are in it with them, and and together we are working on these challenges and opportunities together. It becomes less of an us them kind of paradigm. And I love the work on the binary thinking and the polarities because
Yeah,
often in today's world, in the amplification of situations, people want to zero in on those polarities as being the answer, and the answer is often in the spectrum between them.
right.
And it's having the courage, I think, as leaders and as a school community to actually talk about the opportunities and where do we as a school contextually, where do we want to actually, and how do we want to actually approach this problem or this challenge? Because you know what? Challenges and problems are opportunities for communities to grow. So again, I really feel that the headship series has been a way of advocating for the international school head by seeking greater understanding of others around the work that person is doing who sits in that chair.
Well, and that's why I think we love it as well, because like having not sat in the chair, but having sat with so many heads of schools, like I think there isn't a real broad understanding of the complexities of the role and that the expectations sometimes are just so high without acknowledging that like it can't always look the way that you want it to and that they're serving a school. And how do we build some, I always think, how do we build some empathy for people in that role, because it is so challenging. And I think from the outside I'd say it often seems quite isolating. You have a very small leadership team, but ultimately, you're really dialoguing with the board. Like, how do we really build empathy for the role? That's one of the reasons, that's one of our motivations from Thai is just helping people understand what it is heads of schools do, and how is it that it's different than what we maybe understand it to be?
So at a recent New and Aspiring Heads Institute, which we do each summer for young leaders who seek to learn more about the headship, we often frame the institute within the 6 standards of professional excellence that are a melding of leadership standards from around the world that we aspire all leaders will use to frame their professional work in their school communities, right? Well, we asked new and aspiring Heads Institute members at the end of each session around the different standard areas. So how much time do you think you as a head of school are going to give a week, what percent towards work in this standard area? And just put it up in the corner of your paper and we'll talk about it later. Well, at the end of the institute, the average percentages, if you added up the six different areas, ranged from 160 to 250%. And everybody sat back and thought, well, wait a minute, how do I give 160% or
Mhm.
150% each week? How do these people do it? And we then had a really great conversation around how leadership and management kind of meld together around words like, delegation and phrases like manage, learning how to manage what you've delegated to others,
Trust.
right? Trust, how you meaningfully empower, how you meaningfully empower others, but then how you actually help and ensure that they're successful in what you've empowered them to do. Because phrases like, we want everybody to have an active voice. We want everybody to be engaged. We want everybody to contribute to this learning environment. Everybody has a place because of the strengths and the authenticity that they bring to this community. Those are all really almost easy things to say, but each of those also then involves some very specific strategies around how you bring those to life and how you maximize those, right? And often I think heads of schools who in my mind, I don't want to use the word effective, but are really thoughtful in their approach. When I said before that these are folks who go around each day and have 1,001 conversations with different people in developmentally appropriate ways. So you can talk to a 3-year-old or to an 18
Yeah.
year old or an adult or a parent or an external partner, but you can actually have the same conversation around those very topics by what's important to them. And simply, in some ways, you can ask people, hey, what did you see today when you visited school? Tell me one thing that you saw. And how did your visit make you feel? Right? And so if you start capturing words around what people, see or how an experience makes them feel, you're actually now moving into the affective part of your leadership, which actually now is really you're capturing culture,
Yeah.
capturing climate, and you're capturing stories that you can potentially share with people around what it is that is part of this lived experience in your school community. So again, I just think in some ways the drivers behind those 1,001 conversations need to be values like that around the type of experience
Yeah.
that you're trying to create for people.
Well, I'm really excited about this next series that we're going to be doing with you. So we want to acknowledge and thank you for all the work that you all do on your end and all the writers do to sort of share these perspectives. But we're going to be launching that probably in the next newsletter after you hear this podcast. So we will put some stuff in the show notes for some of the old ones, but this kind of serves as a preview as to why we think this topic is so important. And we hope people engage with it and read some of the articles from some of the heads of schools.
Yeah, I think it's just wonderful. And one of the things I've realized, Stacy, by just seeking volunteers to participate in the headship series is how many people want to actually tell their story,
Yeah.
or how many people want to actually share their experience. And I think in some ways what I'm hearing is that the head of school really wants people to understand they want to help and encourage that understanding of what they do in their work.
Yeah.
Because I think it is a lonely job, and it is a job kind of laden with perception and judgment in some ways about how somebody is spending their time. And often, like we said, it's hard to split 250%, right, across, a 40-hour week type. And by the way, nobody does a 40-hour week.
Oh, no. Not even, I mean, nobody in a school does a 40-hour week.
No, that's exactly it. Exactly it. But this is great. So
They
yeah,
just spend their time differently. I mean, that's what I learned as an administrator. Like, I'm not spending my time grading, but I might be at a board meeting till 9 o'clock at night and have a 15-hour day. Like, you just spend your time differently. Everybody's putting so much time in a
uh,
school.
I just remember in Zurich, we had when I first started there, we had 5 campuses, right, in 5 different communities. And so where am I supposed to be? And how do I
Mm,
ensure that people are seeing me each day, or I'm interacting appropriately. It was so again, there's some real logistical challenges
I
sometimes,
can't even imagine 5 campuses.
whether it's one campus or five. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you for the time. We really appreciate it. And I look forward to speaking to you more and hearing more from your team about some of the work about being out of school.
Thanks, Stacy. Anytime.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for joining the Voice of TIE podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast and our newsletter so you don't miss out on all of the stories and resources from the international schools community. Check out the show notes for links and more information for this episode. You can also find us online at www.tieonline.com and in all of your favorite social media places.